The striking beauty of Venice attracts millions of tourists every year, unaware that they too contribute to its decline. Saving Venice has become a top priority for Italians and for the international community. But the balance between profit and protection is delicate and fraught with conflicts of interest. "20 million tourists come to Venice every year. It is one of the most romantic cities in the world. Visitors wander along its narrow streets and canals, uniquely free of cars. They let themselves get lost in this labyrinth, only to find themselves miraculously where they hoped to go. They come to get a glimpse of the mystery and a sense of the intrigue of decadent Venice."
Giacomo Casanova è il protagonista, in un certo senso, del Settecento
Giacomo
veneziano,
Casanova is the main protagonist of the Venetian 18th century, which is a century in which Carnival is celebrated for nearly 2 months, from the 26th of December to the day before Ash Wednesday. He is a libertine, a man of letters, a man who studies. He also probably has ties to the Freemasonry, and in fact, Venice uses him as a spy.
The Casanova legend has lived on through the centuries and is represented by the city's traditions of fine food, courtesans, and gambling. Fortunes were lost at the gaming table, and gambling became an obsession. Casanova's peccadillos landed him in prison. He crossed the infamous Bridge of Sighs from the Doge's palace where he had been condemned. A short time later, he managed to escape.
Dopo essere scappato da Palazzo Ducale,
After fleeing the Doge's palace, Casanova reaches Paris, and he remains in Paris for some time before returning to Venice. So we have this romantic idea, this legendary, idealized view of him, because all that we know about Casanova, we know from his own writing.
da Casanova lo apprendiamo dai suoi scritti.
Casanova's adventures are closely interwoven with the traditional Carnival festivities. Tourists flock to Venice every February to celebrate the ancient and decadent Carnival rite, donning elaborate costumes and soaking up the splendor of the city of water and its reflections. The magic of Venice has inspired some of the most famous composers, artists, and writers. Mozart, Thomas Mann, Ernest Hemingway all came here. Harry's Bar, the Cipriani Hotel, and the Casino are synonymous with romance, celebrity guests, and the Belle Époque. Tourists come all the year round, even when adverse winds and high tides combine to flood the city's streets. The phenomenon of the so-called acqua alta occurs when a strong southeasterly wind combines with a high lunar tide, a long wave in the lagoon, and low pressure over the Adriatic Sea. These weather conditions push the sea through the 3 lagoon inlets directly towards Venice, along the deep canals. This happens regularly, and more frequently since the disastrous 1966 flood.
While for the tourist this is quite fun, for those who work in the city, in this case the gondoliers, it creates problems. For example, we can't get under the bridges, and we're all blocked, and we can't go about our work, taking our guests around the city.
Non si può girare, portare l'ospite in giro per la città.
The Venetian lagoon is subject to tides, like the rest of the coastline. The marshland has always acted as a natural water break for the rising sea. The tides are vital for the health of the lagoon, but devastating for the city when they cause flooding. Sewage still empties directly into Venice's canals, so the tidal exchange is crucial for the health of the lagoon and its residents.
The task of cleaning the lagoon is given to the sea, to the tides. The tide comes in twice a day and goes out twice a day. Clean water comes in, picks up the waste and takes it out to sea.
The force of the tide is such that every 6 hours it pulls the water out, and every 6 hours it brings it back in. The force of the tides is so strong that it is able to take the city's waste out to sea. The inlets along the spits of sandy beach that separate the open sea from the lagoon were reinforced and became the official entrances to the lagoon. The Chioggia entrance is the southernmost, while the Malamocco inlet is in the middle, and today this is where oil tankers and cargo ships enter the lagoon to reach Porto Marghera and Mestre. The other entrance is at Lido Island, where celebrities flock from all over the world to be feted in the annual September Film Festival. They stay in these luxurious hotels, visit the colourful outlying island of Burano, and enjoy these beaches that form the sea barrier to the lagoon and require constant upkeep. The Lido Lagoon entrance is also the opening through which mega cruise liners reach the ancient city. It is these deep channels that are speeding up the tides and pushing seawater into the heart of the city itself. In 1966, just 50 years ago, in some places, the sea level reached 2 meters higher than average. The question of saving Venice from sinking and the rising sea levels became a national and international priority, and a plan for a massive protection system was set in motion. The project for a surge barrier to block high tides was born and given the name of MOSE, which stands for Experimental Electromechanical Module. It involves positioning dozens of floating barriers on the seafloor to be raised every time an exceptional tide is expected. Hermes Redi is the Director General of the construction consortium that has been entrusted with saving Venice.
Siccome l'andamento della marea è un andamento sinusoidale, perciò va su e scende, va su.
Since the tides follow a sinusoidal curve, so goes up and down, while pressure follows a rising line, if we sum these two curves, we can forecast what the level is likely to be, and on top of this we can add the effect the wind will be having. So the sum of these three factors show us, through our curves, what kind of tide to expect. We can have normal tides, relatively high tides, and very high tides.
Potremmo avere una marea normale, sostenuta, alta, altissima.
The MOSE project is managed by a private consortium called Consorzio Venezia Nuova, based in the regenerated arsenal of Venice, and has been dogged by administrative and legal obstacles and by the biggest corruption scandal the city of Venice has ever seen. The organization's remit has changed over the years.
Il progetto, quando è stato ideato 30 anni fa, era un progetto di carattere.
When the project was begun 30 years ago, it had a heavy engineering bias, so the answers to the problems were very hard, while over time, interaction with environmentalists and also the improvement of technologies has led to the creation of a mixed response. So within our project today, the two aspects are represented, both the engineering and the environmentalist aspects.
Le due anime, sia quella ingegneristica ma anche quella ambientalista.
The housings for the mobile barrier are laid in 4 rows across the lagoon entrances, with the Lido entrance divided in 2 by an artificial island. The huge housings for the floating barriers are built in 3 sites along the edge of the lagoon and then are literally floated and dragged to their resting place, where the floating barriers are then attached using massive 40-ton hinges. But how does the system work? When the high tide is predicted on the basis of wind and tidal data, compressed air is pumped into the barriers, which rise slowly to the surface, blocking the influx of water from the Adriatic Sea. Access to the hinges for maintenance is via 2 service tunnels built into the concrete housings, 20 meters underwater. Should they flood, there is an emergency access door in the next room for divers to enter. These have to be kept watertight and are regularly checked. To defeat the floods, planners over the years have massively transformed Venice's lagoon. And the impact on the environment has undoubtedly been significant. Over 7 billion euros have been sunk into the most ambitious surge barrier ever built. The idea that Venice could be saved from flooding by a mobile dike that rises from the sea floor goes back to the 1970s, when big engineering projects were common to solve everyday problems. However, among the critics of such an approach is Luigi Lazzaro, the president of the Veneto Lega Ambiente Conservation Group. These were the first thoughts after the floods of '66, when they created that special law for Venice. And among the things that were mentioned were defense systems to protect the city. Then it was picked up again in the 80s with the Great Surge Barrier and presented in the 80s. And it was never changed from then. And this is the thing that environmentalists complain about. It is not a project that has kept up with the times, because it is adapted to the 80s, not 2000. The decision to raise the barrier is made here, at the control center, on the basis of the many wind, sea and tide factors that combine to produce the exceptionally high tides that flood the city.
Our screen here offers 3 areas of information. The screens on the extreme left will give us and do give us the situation and the position of every single barrier.
La situazione e la posizione di ogni singola paratoia.
The central part, on the other hand, gives us all the information with regards to the weather forecast. All the rest that you see here gives us information about the environment around the lagoon that gives us a clear picture of the weather here.
Ci permettono di avere chiara la posizione e la situazione meteorologica.
The effects of the different water levels can be seen in this graph, where the amount of flooding is shown in blue. Tides of 80 centimeters automatically flood St. Mark's Square and a few other places, but with the sea at 130 centimeters, the whole city is flooded. It is a hard decision to make to close the water barrier and brings enormous responsibility.
We
have 80 centimeter tides about 30 times a year, so that floods St. Mark's Square, so the tourists are happy. At 1 meter 10, which is when we are thinking of closing the Mose, although it can be closed at any tide level, but there's a kind of technical political convention by which closure occurs at 1 meter 10, this happens 6 or 7 times a year.
Skeptics of Mose say the project has been a massive financial black hole, one which many have profited from, without any guarantee it will work to save Venice. We can't build just a part of it to see if it works. We have to finish it completely to see if it works. It is not reversible, as the concrete structures laid on the sea floor can't be removed easily with their underwater tunnels, and this means that this construction will remain and all the accessory constructions will remain, which we will have to maintain even if the whole project doesn't provide an adequate response to climate change, which, apparently, it does not.
The
work done over these years has been diverse, including reconstruction of the mudflats, reinforcement of the coastline, removal of pollution, protection of polluted areas, all this to regenerate and improve the quality of the lagoon and its waters.
Since the speed of the rising tide is directly proportional to the number of obstacles to the water, the health of the lagoon is a vital part of saving Venice. The flatter the bed of the lagoon, the faster the tide rises.
There is a marvelous photo snapped by our astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti, who took a picture of the Venetian lagoon. You see in the Venetian lagoon, just outside the inlets, these two brown streaks, like a moustache, which is sand, the bottom of the seabed, which we are losing. And the continued use of the lagoon by these monsters is increasing, and they are eroding the lagoon. Once we have lost the sediment and the seabed of the lagoon, no millions can ever bring it back. A flat lagoon is the real danger for this city.
In order to protect Venice better, the Venezia Nuova Consortium has stopped erosion at some islands and created a number of new ones. But, say the activists, these have been built in locations where they could actually even speed up the movement of tides. These areas of small inlets, on the one hand, have been improved, but the negative side of it is that the consortium got the right to do these works and made them in a way that we have defined motorways, because they were made in such a way that they created islands where the tides hit the shores and then increase the speed of the water, when in fact the shores are supposed to slow the water entering the lagoon, so by speeding it up, we have water arriving even faster to our ankles, and even above.
As all real Venetians know, the real defense against the high water is not just engineering works from the 70s built in the inlets. The real defense is a lagoon that is in balance, a lagoon with its own morphology that is able to progressively slow the advancing tide. A flat lagoon is a lagoon that offers less and less resistance, and the tide enters faster.
Saving Venice also involves re-stabilizing the lagoon, stopping erosion, and recreating the uneven system of sandbanks and marshes that have always slowed and dispersed high tides. But for many, the big ships are the single most important threat to the city and lagoon environment.
The Anti-Cruise Liner Committee was founded on the 6th of January 2012, exactly a week before the Costa Concordia wreck, and it was created to oppose a situation that had become unbearable.
On the 13th of January 2012, the Costa Concordia cruise ship crashed into rocks off the island of Giglio in Tuscany, killing 32 and bringing about not only the largest salvage ever, but also a number of new regulations about close sail-bys by cruise liners. However, soon afterwards, the new regulations were overturned on appeal to the local courts in Venice, and now these massive ships are allowed into the city. The potential for an accident in the most beautiful city in the world remains massive.
Here there are pilots, the pilots of the port that are on the bridge when the ships come in and go out. And there are also two tugboats. We've seen the Jolly Nero, which made an error during a maneuver. Despite having two tugboats, one in front and one behind, it crashed into the pilot's lighthouse of Genoa, killing 9 people. The Jolly Nero shows that accidents happen even when the best technology is applied.
There is more to the issue than simply the danger of a crash. The cruise ships are extremely polluting, and to get to and from the open sea, they need to cross the city twice.
Usually in port cities there's the sea, the port and the city. Here we are one of the few cities, maybe the only one in Europe, that has the sea, then the city, then the port. So anything that comes in from the sea has to cross the whole city, exposing the inhabitants, the physical structure, the environment of the lagoon, the physical structure of the city and its inhabitants to enormous risks and dangers.
Venice has fallen victim to the effects of mass tourism and is paying a high price. Millions of tourists arrive in the city of Venice every year, but few fully realize the life and death struggle that the city is engaged in. On the one hand, the economy of the unique city depends on tourism, but on the other, the very people who come here to admire Venice are also damaging it.
Uno studio dell'Università di Washington, quindi non del WWF, ha stabilito che
A study by the University of Washington, so not the WWF, has shown that a single one of these cruise liners produces pollution equivalent to 14,000 cars. And during a summer weekend, there are 6 or 7, which is maximum capacity. You can work out how much poison is vomited into the air of this city.
Between the smog polluting the air and the wake of the cruise ships damaging Venice's infrastructure, some are calling for the lucrative cruise industry to be held financially responsible.
It's not as if he who causes the damage pays for it, as it should be normally. So if I earn millions with this kind of tourism but destroy or damage the city, I should pay. But no, the cost is offloaded onto the shoulders of the citizens, who have to pay for damage caused by others.
Despite the dire warnings of activists and local residents, little has been done to stem the tide of mass tourism that has created an imperceptible but constant decay of the city. The bumping of feet and trolley cases on the Rialto Bridge is contributing to its ruin. Apart from mass tourism, subsidence, flooding and airborne pollution from ships, the growth of the petrochemical industries on the mainland has also undermined the lagoon.
With an average lagoon depth of 1 meter, we have dug motorways. We dug channels that were 10, even 15 meters deep in order for these ships to pass. When the ship passes through, these 135,000 cubic meters of water don't bump up against the city walls, but rather the edge of the canals. So this creates a tsunami because this water that is displaced overflows.
The magnificent Grand Canal in Venice at sunset is a tranquil scene that belies the toxic atmosphere of suspicion, corruption and anger that threatens to bring about the twilight of the Republic.
Nel 1500 Venezia è praticamente
In 1500, Venice is the city we see today. There is a map, an important document, the Barbari map, which reproduces Venice in maximum detail, so we can recreate what it might have looked like at the beginning of the 1500s.
Agli inizi dell'anno del 1500.
While Venice can seem like a maze to those trying to navigate it on foot, viewing the lagoon on a map makes it easier to understand how Venice historically used its complicated location as a strategic strength.
Nell'azzurro noi vediamo la rete di canali navigabili che sono
In the blue, we see the network
e la
of
parte
navigable
invece
canals
celeste è
that
la
are almost
parte
all
con un
natural.
basso fondale.
And the part that is light blue is a shallow area. That can be as shallow as 30 or 20 centimeters. There are witness accounts from visitors in the early 20th century that say that in the low tides, almost the whole seabed of the lagoon would emerge, leaving just the traces of the water channels, almost as if the cork had been pulled and dried up the whole environment.
E aver prosciugato.
These are the accesses to the lagoon, and only Venice, only Venetians, knew them in depth and knew how to navigate them, and still today I could say. So Venice could use this great advantage without having to build walls, because it was impregnable and invincible.
Senza dover costruire mura, perché era praticamente inespugnabile, inattaccabile.
The things that should not have been done are many. They shouldn't have dug the oil tanker channel in the 1960s, which is the channel that enters in Malamocco Inlet and reaches the port of Marghera, and where the heavy chemical industry developed in the city that on its own caused massive damage to the city and to the hydrodynamic balance of the lagoon. From there, the loss of sediment began, which caused the lowering of the seafloor and canals of Venice and the speeding up of the tide as it enters. In the early 1960s, during Italy's economic boom, the industries in Mestre and Porto Marghera drew water from the aquifers under Venice as coolant. The city sank as a result. Meanwhile, climate change is steadily raising sea levels. Professor Giuseppe Gambolati of Padua University has studied this dual threat over the years.
Dunque Venezia ha subito un abbassamento.
Venice has sunk due to human activities during the 1950s and 60s by about 12 centimeters. Then this sinking stopped in the 1970s because the sinking was due to the extraction of underground water, especially for industrial use in Porto Marghera.
The combination of rising seas and sinking sea floor is catastrophic, increasing flooding and erosion of Venice's buildings.
In the last century, the 20th century, we estimate that the average sea level has risen by 12 or 13 centimeters. So the sum of the rising sea level and the sinking terrain comes to a total of 25 centimeters. So the city of Venice, over the last century, has lost over 25 centimeters in height with respect to the average sea level.
The rising water is causing serious and specific damage to the city's buildings, even when flooding remains within the normal limits. The typical Venetian house is constructed of bricks with a damp course of Istrian limestone that stops water rising and damaging the bricks above. The ground floor of the larger houses also had a well, which drew on rainwater collected in massive cisterns under the street or flooring of the house. The wooden floors and roof beams and, where necessary, chains were used to hold the house together, literally.
Se un edificio cede il
If a building subsides internally, it tends to lean on itself, and this leaning inwards gives it a kind of stability, and this is the secret of the construction techniques of the old Venetian builders.
These images show how the water levels have risen above where the original steps had been placed, and even above the damp course that was built to prevent salt water penetrating the bricks above. Now the gates that were once opened to bring in goods or important guests are rotting. And above the damp course, the seawater is literally crumbling the bricks. Houses on the street have their own floodgates to protect homes from high water.
E l'umidità e gli effetti li possiamo vedere
we can see that the damp has reached everywhere. Today, the humidity has reached beyond the lower attic. This creates problems because the bond between the brick walls and the attic is very important for the stability of the house. And when this is destroyed, the whole facade can come down, and other problems that extend over the whole structure.
Today, most of the city's transport is by motorboat or barge. The buses are the diesel-fueled vaporetti, while hundreds of outboard engines are used to power transport boats all over the city. The waves from these propellers are slowly but steadily eroding the cement between the bricks. The constant churning of water in the canals has had a devastating effect on the foundations of the buildings.
La calce immerso nell'acqua è sottoposto.
The cement that is immersed underwater is subject to uneven processes of wet and dry, so the adhesion with the brickwork changes. It is the weakest element of the brickwork, and the effect of the waves just increases this action, so if the cement disappears, the system becomes unstable, leading to the fall of bricks, especially in the foundations. And then the water erodes the mud and the floors collapse.
In order to reduce the churning that is eroding the city's foundations, there is a speed limit on motorboats, and Venice traffic police enforce it. In 2012, the Corilla Consortium of university professors and researchers surveyed one of the city's most famous churches, Santa Maria Maggiore. They also drove a core sampler diagonally under the church to find out the state of the wooden piles deeper under the surface.
We found a place where we could carry out a 12-meter-long subsoil sample at an angle set so that we could have the certainty of finding the piles, and we found them at 3.5 meters, 4 meters depth.
Guido Biscontin examined the samples from under the church, and to his dismay, found that the wooden piles were in a worse state than previously believed.
I have to say that even at that depth, the state of decay, so the loss of cellulose, is clear to see. You can see the central nucleus of the pile, and around it a centimeter or 1.5 centimeters, it doesn't make much difference, of wood that comes away easily.
These incredible photographs show the ancient wooden planks laid over the piles. The whole weight of the church and its stone structure rest on these planks. The group was able to calculate the stresses and strains that subsidence was causing on the church itself, so as to better identify where it needed shoring up.
La casa veneziana è stata pensata proprio perché
The Venetian house was designed so that the building could adapt to all the deformations of the terrain. And there are certain construction techniques used, such as the use of metal chains, that consolidate this box.
In these diagrams, we see where the original builder placed most piles so as to hold up the church. Since the bell towers have the tendency to subside at different rates, they were built separately from the churches so as not to drag them down.
Quando ci troviamo di fronte a un complesso di chiesa e campanile,
when we see a church and bell tower group, the church will have a structural behavior which is completely different from the bell towers, and this will always cause problems. So, in many cases, it's safer for the church and bell tower to be built separate from each other, so that there is no interaction between them that could make the problem worse.
Unfortunately, shoring up ancient buildings such as Santa Maria Maggiore is too costly for the empty coffers of the city of Venice. But the engineers and academics now have a better understanding of what is happening in the city's subsoil. Preserving and restoring the city's monuments and buildings is a costly and politically delicate process, and the Corilla Consortium of academics provides expert advice to public bodies and monitors the impact of the more massive public works undertaken in the city.
Corilla is an association between the two universities of Venice, the University of Padua, the National Research Centre and the National Institute of Oceanography and Experimental Geophysics. We have carried out a coordinated program of research after we received indications as to the themes that were most in need of answers from the public institutions whose task it is to safeguard Venice, both national and local.
Corilla has been involved in assessing the city's major engineering operations, especially the massive construction project known as MOSE, the most ambitious surge barrier ever designed.
Our activity was in support of the state in monitoring the MOSE work sites as an independent body to evaluate the environmental impact such a widespread and lengthy construction project might have up to the time of its completion.
The huge engineering project, conceived in the 1970s but operational only since 2003, is the source of heated confrontation, mainly about how the money to build it has been spent. Some worry that finding a mechanical solution to the high tides may actually just make the city's problems worse. Researcher Pietro Teatini has worked with Professor Giuseppe Gambolati on an alternative project for saving Venice and is worried about the effects of closing the barriers too often.
Such frequent closure of the mosaic could have an important impact on the internal waters, on the city and on the lagoon itself.
Gambolati and Teatini have come up with another idea: to raise Venice by injecting water under the city.
Our project involves the stable raising of the city, and of course, by raising the city, the level of water diminishes. We propose to raise the city by taking seawater and making wells that are 700 or 800 meters deep and injecting the water into the rocks that you find at that depth. If Venice were to rise, we have predicted she would rise in a period of 10 years by 25 or 30 centimeters, very gradually.
It was never an alternative project to MOSE, but a complementary project in which, with this idea, we could prolong the operative life of the MOSE in a synchronized way.
It is a hot Sunday afternoon in the lagoon. The inhabitants of the Venetian plain come here to get away from the stifling heat. From the island of Lazzaretto Nuovo, once Venice's quarantine, the islands of Torcello, Burano and Murano are visible. In the foreground is one of the typical wetlands that are covered by brackish waters at high tide. On this day, there is no risk of acqua alta, and the problems of subsidence seem far away. The city of Venice is full of people. The queues in St. Mark's Square get longer by the minute. The amazing 11th century cathedral is the heart of Venice, and yet it is the first to be flooded. The area between here and Rialto Bridge is the most ancient and the most endangered part of the city. Rialto Bridge is one of only two spanning the Grand Canal, but is just one of over 400 in Venice that connect 124 islands on which the unique buildings of the city stand. Close by is a characteristic second-hand bookshop. It bears the name of Venice's biggest enemy, Acqua Alta, and gives onto a canal that regularly floods. It is an example of how Venetians have come to accept the floods and even use them to their advantage. Tourists come here to browse the books and for a chance to cool off from the stifling heat of the Calle, the tiny streets of Venice. Even the staircase to the small terrace overlooking the canal is made of books. The shop is often flooded, but Venice has a long tradition of managing its changing water levels.
In the past, the big threat was from the rivers. Today, the fight and the threat is from the opposite side. Today, the threat is from the sea, because the environment has been changed in the course of the last century.
As the threats increase, Venetians, individuals and activists are doing their best to protect the city they love. In May 2015, the members of the No Big Ships Committee swam across the Giudecca Canal to block the ships in an unprecedented demonstration. 12 ships went by that morning. Entrepreneurs like Renzo Rosso are taking a different approach and putting their money where their heart is and where the hearts of millions of tourists are. It is both good public relations and good for the community.
Le multinazionali hanno una grandissima responsabilità nel cambiamento.
Multinationals have a huge responsibility in bringing about change and moving forward projects on the ground. The governments and those who govern in the region and provinces have a lot less ability to interact than the multinationals, who can do a lot. It is the beginning of a new era where entrepreneurship has a responsibility to give back to the community that in some way it has received from.
La sponsorizzazione non è l'unica.
Sponsorship is not the only instrument, but it is just one of the things that is important to do without selling out our image as a living city as opposed to a Disneyland that is trying to sell itself.
There is no single problem. There are many problems. As far as I am concerned, we should start by facing up to one problem, and that of the big ships is a pressing problem. Also, because there is a safety issue.
Magnificent Venice may be living its last years as a functioning, vibrant community, if more is not done to save the imperiled city soon. Politics and finance must become more transparent, sensitive, and socially aware, lest the fragile city of water end up a mere sunken relic of a glorious past.